Fill opacity is a very useful option in Photoshop, and it's very similar to using opacity. The difference is that fill opacity will only hide the content of the selected layer while keeping the layer styles visible. So like in this case, on this layer, I have several layer styles like bevel and emboss, stroke and drop shadow. And if I reduce the opacity, it will hide both the content of the layer, which is in this case a type, and it will also hide the effects, as you can see. So if I set it to 20%, that will both be applied on the content and also on the layer styles. But what happens if I set this back to 100% and I start reducing the fill opacity? By the way, as you can see, instead of clicking on these arrows here, I always click on the word and drag it left and right. If you look at the image now, while I'm reducing the fill opacity, I'm hiding the content, but I still keep the visibility of the layer styles. And basically that is all what you need to know about fill opacity, but let me give you a couple of useful keyboard shortcuts. If you hold down Shift and use one of the numbers on the keyboard, you can set the fill opacity quickly. So if I want to set it back to 100%, I would just press Shift 0. Shift 5 would be 50% fill opacity. If I press Shift 1, 2 quickly, one after the other, then it will be 12% the fill opacity. So that's just a quick way to work with it. And one more thing, if you use a layer style like gradient overlay, for example, and then try to use the fill opacity, it won't make any difference because the gradient overlay completely fills the layer. So if you want to see again the transparent look, what we could create with the fill opacity, and also have some sort of gradient overlay, you can double click on gradient overlay and change the blend mode to something like overlay. If I go back and reduce the fill opacity, now we will have the gradient overlay as well visible, but we can still see through and make this whole effect transparent. And last but not least, another useful feature, if you hold down Alt while dragging the fill opacity, and it also applies to opacity, it will make a much smaller difference. So when you are doing this scrubby change, hold down Alt to make a more precise change, and hold down Shift if you want to make it fast. That's just another shortcut to make your work more efficient. Having lots of layers in your compositions in Photoshop can be a little bit difficult to work with. In these cases, it's good to create layer groups. And also, most of the cases, nested layer groups, which means whenever you have a group inside a group, or it can be several groups inside groups. So for example here, for this part of the design, which I can turn on and off just to show you which part I'm referring to, has several nested layer groups. I have the open states, and inside the open states as well I have these different parts which I can turn on and off. Now if I want to quickly close all the groups, and let's just say I have a couple of layer groups opened here, so I want to quickly close all of them, I can hold down Command or Control on PC and click on the little arrow next to the layer group icon, and that will close all the main layer groups. They are the topmost layer groups, the way they are called usually. So if I Command click again on any of these topmost layer group arrows, it will open all topmost layer groups, but it won't open the nested layer groups. So let me just do this again, open and close quickly all of them. If I Alt click on a layer group which has nested layer groups inside, it will open also that content. So let me just show you. If I close this here, I just simply click on it to open and close, but it won't open the nested layer groups. But if I Alt click on the icon or this little arrow, it will open all nested layer groups, so I can reveal all the content inside this group. If I Alt click again on it, it will close it. So once again, Command click opens everything apart from nested layer groups, while Alt click opens the nested layer groups as well. And you can even combine these two keyboard shortcuts. Command Alt, click on any of the topmost layer group arrows, will open everything. So it will open the topmost layer groups and also the nested layer groups. So it's a very smart way to quickly find your way in the labyrinth of layer groups and layers in your Photoshop documents. Multi-level masking can be very useful when you have to create a mask, but you would like to keep specific parts of the mask separately editable. Let me show you an example. Let's just say we would like to extract this phone booth from this photograph, but we would like to also put another image behind it and extract also the inside of the booth. So we would like to make it see-through. So how would I do that? Instead of using one mask, I would use two separate masks, because then I can easily adjust the two masks separately. So first of all, I would make a selection, and in this case I would use quick selection just to quickly draw over the phone booth. And whenever I make mistakes, I can always go back and hold down Alt, maybe zoom a little bit closer and just draw over that part which I don't need, like that. Let's have a look at here at the bottom, also just a little part which goes outside of the selection. That works for me. So I'm going to click on creating a mask, this icon here at the bottom of the layers panel. I will turn this selection already into a layer mask. Now, how can I add another layer mask on a layer which already has a layer mask? The best way to do that, and that's what I call multi-level masking, is to create a group by pressing Command or Control G, and then create your selection and save that selection as a mask on the group. And that way you will have two layer masks assigned to the same layer. So let me show you this. I am going to quickly create a selection again, but in this case I'm going to use the magic wand. Make sure you have the image selected, and if you have contiguous option on and the higher tolerance, it will still only be able to select only until the magic wand finds the boundaries or edges where there are different colors. So that's the default option for magic wand. But if you turn that off and you click on the image, it will select everything on the image which has the same color range. I can hold down Shift to select more, like these little parts here, and I have now everything selected inside the phone booth, but I don't want to make any selections outside of it, so I'm going to constrain my selection a bit, and I'm going to use the rectangular marquee tool and hold down Alt and Shift together to create an intersect adjustment or change to my selection. And I'm going to select that part which I need, and then it will only use that selection and leave the other outside part of the selection. So now I can turn this into another mask. So if I go to the group here on the top, I can add this as a mask. But whenever I add the selection as a mask, the layer will only keep the selected part visible. If I invert the mask, which I can do either from the Properties panel, and there's the invert button, or I can also press Command or Control I. And now we managed to do what I wanted to do. So we have this phone box, first of all, extracted from its background, and now we also extracted the inside part. And the great thing is that I have full control over these separately. And that's the interesting part. So if I shift click on this, I can turn it on and off, the second layer mask, or I can shift click on the other one, on and off. And for example, I can keep the environment and only see through the phone box separately. So that's what I mean when I refer to multi-level masking. And just as a side note, you can have 10 nested layer groups, so 10 levels of layer masks, which means you can have actually 11 layer masks used on the same layer. Because first of all, you have one which is on the layer, and then you have 10 other layer masks. So the next one, on the way I would do it, create another group and then use the mask on that, and then so on and so forth until you reach the limit, the 10 nested layer group levels. So good luck with this technique. I hope you will find it useful. Believe me, it can save you a lot of time. Whenever you have several layers in your Photoshop document, you might find it difficult to always switch between those layers. There's a feature called Auto Select, which you can turn on for the Move tool, and with that you can always select automatically whatever you click on. That's quite useful, and you can decide whether you want to select a layer or the whole group on which you click on. So that's quite good, but what I prefer to do is turn this off, because in some cases it just gets a bit annoying that it automatically selects something that I click on, and especially if you use blend modes and you have several layers on top of each other, you might select layers that you don't want to select. So if it's turned off, then you can still use this functionality by holding down Command or Control on the keyboard. So normally now the Move tool would keep the layer selected, whichever is selected. So in this case, like this layer here. But if I hold down Command with the Move tool together and click on something like this text here, I will be able to quickly select that. And the functionality is still working for this drop down. So if I choose group and I click on something, then it will select the whole group by command clicking on it. And you can select a group, for example, like this here, and then Command Shift click on another group, and then you have two groups selected with it. So Shift can add or remove from a selection. So let me just show you, like selecting login, Command click on it, and Command Shift click select the check button. Now I can move these together, and the same way I can Shift click on one again to remove it from the selection. And another way to use the same keyboard shortcut is to click and drag over an area. So if I hold down Command Shift and I actually want to deselect first everything, so I just Command clicked somewhere outside of the canvas. That makes sure I don't have any layers selected. And the same thing you can also do by going to the Select menu and choose Deselect Layers. And once you have everything deselected, you can hold down Command and Shift and click and drag over the area which you want to select. And you can see on the right side already what is going to be selected. So if I hover over areas, I select more and more or less. So I can make a selection of the layers I want to select, and then I will be able to move these together. So this is a much faster way to find and select those layers that you want to work with. Instead of always going to the layers panel, just use these keyboard shortcuts together with the Move tool. Whenever you create an adjustment layer, it will always affect all the layers beneath it. So for example, if I choose black and white adjustment on this composition, all my layers below this adjustment layer will be affected, even if they are in different groups. And that's the important thing. So let me just show you. This is the adjustment layer, which I can turn on and off. And you can see whatever falls below it will be affected. If I drag this all the way on the top, then even the logo and all these icons will be affected as well. If I drag it below the image, then that part will be again in colors. So how can I limit the adjustment to only a selected group? In this case, I'm going to put it in this group, the one on the top. Let me just show you which part is that part on the top. So I would like to limit the adjustment to that. Then I need to select the group and set the blend mode to normal. And by doing that, the adjustment layers effect will only affect the layers inside this group. So once again, the default blend mode for a group is pass through. But if you set that to normal, then you can constrain the adjustment layers effect inside that selected group. Using masking and layer styles together sometimes can cause a bit of a trouble. Let me show you what I mean. If I add a mask to this text layer, which has some layer styles assigned to it, and I use the brush tool to draw over it, it will give an interesting effect which I might like or I might not like. So maybe I don't want to see that black stroke inside the text. I would like to see only masking effect without creating a new appearance for the stroke around the text. So how can I use the masking to hide the layer styles in these areas? The way you can do that is quite simple. You just double click on the layer and then choose Layer Mask Hide Effects. So that's the option. Let me just move this to the side so you can see it. Once I check it, it will still mask the text, but now it will also mask or hide the layer styles. So it will completely erase sort of that layer or hide it. So let me show you before and after. And the same can work for vector masks, but that's a completely separate option, again, which you can turn on or off if you wish to use it. And just as a side note, whenever you use special blending options, or these are called advanced blending options, you will have this little icon next to the FX icon where you have two shapes overlapping each other. That indicates that you used advanced blending options on the selected layer or layer group. Smart objects are great whenever you want to keep the original resolution or original quality of a selected layer. Like in these cases, this image here, if I select layer for my move tool and I command click on it to quickly select it, you can see it's set to a smart object. So that means this layer I can resize and I would still have good quality image because the original resolution was higher than the one that I'm using currently on this layer. So there's already a smart object there, and probably this one is also a smart object here. But if I want to keep these layer groups like these open states, under the open states I can close all these and check that there is one layer group for this panel, there's another one for that, and another one for that. What if I would like to resize these regularly, or I would like to add effects to them together on the whole group, like smart filters? Then I can turn them into smart objects, the whole group, like breakfast tiffin, this panel here. I'm going to right click on it and choose convert to smart object. I will do the same with the other panel on the top, right click, convert to smart object. And then if I want to add the filter, let's just add a filter to this. For now, just to see how it works, I'm going to use blur, maybe just a simple Gaussian blur, and then I click on OK. As you can see, now it's applied to the whole group, and I can always reduce the blur. So this could be a good way to focus on a specific part of my layout or design by blurring the other parts. And this is something is completely non-destructive, so I can always go back and make changes to it. But now that I have a smart object for the whole group, I can always double click on the smart object, and then I will enter the source of the smart object, in which I still have the whole layer structure. So inside this smart object, I might have other nested smart object, like that arrow there. That is a nested smart object. If I double click on that, I enter the arrow itself, where I have an adjustment layer and the arrow. So I could dive deep into the whole design, and I can make changes to this hue saturation. For example, change the color to this. I save this change, because this is an embedded file, the source of the smart object. I close it, and as you can see, now it's updated here, but I have to also save this state or this level of the smart object, and then go back to the main results, and here you can see now it's updated. So we can actually use smart objects for a lot of reasons. First of all, to avoid clutter in our layer structure, because instead of having lots of folders, I will have just a smart object, and I can go easily into that smart object by double clicking on it. And once I'm inside the smart object, again, I will only see those layers that I'm working with at the moment. So it's like isolating these elements from the main design. If you haven't tried nesting smart objects yet, make sure you try it, because especially if you are in user interface design or web design, this will help you a lot to work more efficiently in Photoshop. Did you know that you can use blending options to create a mask and get rid of an unwanted background? This is what I'm going to show you in this video. So what you need to do is, first of all, if you have a background layer, you have to double click on it to turn it into a new layer. Then double click on it again, And here in the blend if options, you can move these sliders, the this layer, black or white sliders. If I move the black one, I will start to see through the black parts or dark parts of the selected layer. If I move the white one, then I will start to see through the white parts. So that's very useful. But before we actually do this, let me move this layer onto another document. So we can see it, how it works together with other images behind it. So if I go to the window menu and choose arrange and choose tile all vertically, then I can drag and drop this here onto the other image. Now I can go to window arrange and choose consolidate all to tabs. I can zoom also a little bit closer. So let me just zoom closer to this part. And once again, I do the same thing, double click on the layer and choose blend if this layer and start dragging that arrow on the right to remove the white parts of the selected layer. Now the only problem, as you can see, it's quite crispy on the edges. It's not really nice and smooth. So to be able to do that, to be able to create a nice smooth blending, I'm going to alt click on this arrow to divide it into two, and that will make a much better blend. I can increase this up a bit on the right, and we can see it looks already much better. So that was before and that is after. Now if I click on OK, this actually doesn't make much of a difference here in the layers panel. It just adds an advanced blending option. It indicated also here in the layer, but apart from that, nothing else happens. But what if I want to use, for example, a drop shadow on this text or logo? So I double click on the layer styles and choose drop shadow. As you can see, unfortunately, this won't really help us. Because of the blending, we don't really have edges around the text. We still have the original edges of that white background. So how can we get rid of that, and how can we have the edges around the text? The way you can do that is by first of all creating a duplicate of the layer, pressing Command J, and on that one at the bottom maybe we can set or any of these back to normal. So I can double click on it and we can set back the layer blending to normal, and then we can keep this turned off. Now I come back to this here on the top and create a new layer, an empty layer, and then select these two, the one with the advanced blending options and the empty layer, and merge them together by pressing Command or Control E. Now what happened is actually I removed completely the white background, so it erased the white background. But this is a destructive editing, which I always try to avoid. And that's why I created the duplicate layer in the first place, because now I can turn this layer on the top into a mask. And to do that, I'm going to Command click on the thumbnail, which will turn the layer into a selection. Then I select the layer at the bottom with the white background and click on creating a mask. So now the original blending is saved as a mask. So I can even delete this layer on the top and have the whole thing completely saved non-destructively. If I alt click on the mask, I can even see that is a really good masking from the white background. So now if I double click on it, I can also add the drop shadow, and it will do what we were planning to do, to have a drop shadow effect which wraps around the logo itself. In this video, I'm going to show you another advanced blending option, which can be used whenever you work with clipping masks. So here in this composition, I have three layers. I have this nice background layer, then I have the splatter at the bottom, and I have a text layer, which is actually not a text layer, it's a rasterized text, it's just an image layer. If I create a clipping mask between these two layers here on the top, I can do that by alt-clicking between the two layers or pressing Command or Control Alt G on the layer on the top. Then I will clip the text onto the splatter. So let's see before and after. I switch between the two using the keyboard shortcut. So I would like to see the text only over the splatter, but then I would like to also make changes to the blending of the splatter itself. So let's see what happens if I select the splatter and change the blend mode, for example, to multiply. Multiply will always darken all the layers together, and in this case, the white text completely disappeared. And that's a very interesting effect, because in this case, the text acts like a mask which will cut through the splatter. So if I select the text layer, I can move this around. As you can see, we see through the splatter. So by combining two layers and using some blend modes and clipping masks, we can come up with interesting effects like this. But what if we don't want to do this, and even though we use multiply for the splatter, we still would like to see white text, and at the same time still would like to have clipping between them? In that case, it becomes very useful to use this advanced blending option, which we have to set for the base layer of the clipping mask, which in our case is the splatter. So I double click on that, and here I can turn off the option called blend clip layers as group. Once I turn that off, I can still keep the multiply effect for the splatter, but the text on the top will still be visible as a normal blending. So if I click on OK, now I can set completely different effect for the splatter. I can set it, for example, to overlay and still see the text normally, because that's layer blend mode is still normal. I can change that one as well, maybe to color dodge, and whatever I want. From this point on, they are completely separate and they are not affecting each other. Remember, to change the behavior of this, you have to double click on the base of the clipping group, and there you have to choose blend clip layers as group. And from that point on, whatever you choose for the blending mode of the base layer will be applied for all the layers on top of it. So we will get back to the effect that we had originally. Last but not least, I would like to show you how to change the thumbnails in the Layers panel. Whenever you right-click in the Layers panel, you will get these options to change the size of the thumbnails. And there's also a very useful option here, which is not the default in Photoshop, and that's the Clip Thumbnails to Layer Bounds. Now, if you change that, it will change the way you see the layers. So normally you see them within the document bounds. So like the splatter, we can tell it's at the bottom, while the text is on the top of the canvas. But if I change this option to Clip Thumbnails to Layer Bounds, then I will see only the content of the actual layer. Even if it's outside the canvas, I will see its whole content. Like the splatter, you can tell that we can see the whole content now, or for the text as well, it's much easier to see its text actually written on it. Then if I change back to document bounds, we won't be able to tell really what's on those layers, but we can tell where they are in our composition. So once again, the layer bounds option is better to tell what's on the layer, while the other option, document bounds, is better to tell where they are in our composition. And we can also change the size of the thumbnails, which will make it even easier to see what we have on these layers. But also, this is something that you might want to change if you work on another document. Like, let's just say here, we have lots of layers, and if I open a layer when there's so many other things, it's definitely not the best to have the large thumbnails. So we can always right click even on a thumbnail and change that here. We can choose no thumbnails to see the smallest size for the layers as possible. And that's all I wanted to show you in this roundup. So 10 things that you didn't know about layers. I hope you learned some new techniques today, and I hope you will join me next time as well. Thanks a lot for your attention.